sectoral organizing and sectoral bargaining. You're outside of the enterprise model of the National Labor Relations Act, where it's one local, one job site. Now you're looking at an entire industry, in this context, an entire state of Massachusetts. And so now you cross a different line. Again, it's all outside the National Labor Relations Act, so there's no appeal, there's no nothing that the National Labor Relations Board can do, because this is outside of that scope. And that's assuming that this survives a court challenge at some point. I think it's going to be challenged, because there is a case law precedent, most notably the San Diego Building Trades Council versus Garmin decision. I don't know if you talked that on your show, but that is 66-year-old case law from the Supreme Court that sets up the National Labor Relations Board as the ultimate arbiter for union differences, for organized labor differences with employers. And now you're outside of that scope. Now, some are going to say, well, we can do this because it is outside the scope. But then again, someone else can equally say, wait a minute, that's precedent, that's case law. I don't believe you. And now you got a long, drawn out 1 to 2 to 3 year court process in order to interpret the law under the current context. That doesn't help the drivers at all, because now the drivers have been sold something that they are not going to get at least for another 2 years.
Yeah.
But then again, have the app companies gone beyond the IC model that they claim to follow and are doing performative metrics?
Yeah.
Should they even have that ability? No. So this is something where,
and it's not just because I would want that. I honestly, being a traditional independent contractor, doing lasers, lighting, production work since the 90s, and then this started in 2009. I didn't even see it in my market until 2014. So it's been 11 years of mixing this in for me. They need to, if they want to keep the definition, things need to change. The metrics need to go.
Right. And maybe that's something that through their negotiation, that's why I'm kind of looking at the Washington State model. Could that be the vehicle? Because basically, from what I understand of Washington State, I think you have a little bit more insight on this than I do. But the Washington State model, which went in both in 2022 and with expanded benefits in 2023, what that did is that you're basically having your discussion and bargaining, but it's not within a union. We have the unions at the table, you have drivers at the table, you have legislators and the government at the table. Everybody's at the same table. And then when something's ready to go before the legislature for approval based on an agreement, then it's approved by the legislature, signed by the governor. Now, Washington State is a predominantly blue state, just like the other four, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Illinois, and California. Yep. So could that be the model, at least for now? Because we've talked about sectoral bargaining. Is that even, this is literally unprecedented, as one subject matter expert, Kim Cavan, cited back in July of last year. So it's going to be court challenges along the way. And
I guess you're right. How could the Flex Association represent them? Because they're going to all need to represent themselves. No?
Exactly. Or you're representing an industry, you're working out with an industry, and is that the model? Because what people are trying to do, they're trying to copy the European model.
Right.
And a lot of things about Europe that I'm concerned about. And John Stossel recently, I don't know if you saw his recent video about Europe.
Is it the one you reposted on Twitter?
I know I reposted. I did repost
something of his a day or two ago. I saw, yeah.
Yeah. So he talked about labor unions and how delivery companies are not going to deliver certain things because they disagree with the politics. See, that's what the far left in our country has been trying to set up unions to do, to carry out far left policy initiatives. A big example, I remember I cited this in one of my articles last year, the Green New Deal. That's why the Democratic Socialists of America, they put out a video saying, we organize in order to save the planet through the unions. And that's an extreme element. And I don't believe the rank and file, definitely not all of the rank and file, are in agreement with that approach to organizing. It needs to be the back to basics of collective bargaining, contract administration, period. That's where traditional labor unions have worked in partnership with management. Now, our friend Dr. Leah Palagashvili, about a week after her testimony before Illinois via Zoom, she published another paper because, with the tariffs and everything coming back.
She's the one with Mercatus, right?
Correct. Mercatus at George Mason University.
Yeah.
So she published some fresh research of, well, it's great that we're trying to bring manufacturing back. Can we learn from some of the mistakes made in the past when the unions, and there's some recent examples, UPS is a big recent example about unions receiving so much, drivers making $170,000 a year, but how many were laid off after that collective bargaining agreement was ratified? And there are other examples too, and we can find Dr. Palagashvili's research. I believe it's dated May the 7th. So I remember it was like just a week after the April 30th testimony in Illinois. So that brings us to what my approach is in Illinois. I'm looking at Massachusetts. I'm looking at these other states. Now, I know the Chicago Hispanic Chamber of Commerce president and CEO, a gentleman named Jaime DiPolo. He put an op-ed out in Crane Chicago Business around June 23rd and stated, well, let's just get all the stakeholders together. Well, that's kind of what the Washington State solution was all about. What was promised is, okay, on June the 16th, you had a controversial vote for the city of Chicago, comparable to like the city of Seattle or the city of Minneapolis, was going to do something for rideshare drivers. It was turning into a very controversial vote on the Chicago City Council. There's 50 aldermen plus the mayor, so 51 people. And people were counting the votes a little over a month ago, and the votes were very tight. You didn't know how this ordinance, it was an ordinance to raise drivers' base pay, etc. So what happened was the alderman, I think, I want to say his name is Michael Rodriguez, they worked out a deal with Uber to say, we're going to just take the statewide. And they definitely cited the Massachusetts example. And the other gentleman, Jaime DiPolo, he cited Minnesota. Well, if you look at Minnesota, all they do is say, we're going to use Massachusetts. So it all comes down to Massachusetts. And so they feel that by their count, there are 100,000 rideshare drivers, Uber and Lyft in Illinois. That's their numbers. And they're going to say, okay, now we're going to pass this in Springfield at the state capitol. Question is when? Because right now, for those who don't know, Illinois State Legislature, the General Assembly, their spring session ended at the very first day of June. And they're not due to be back in Springfield until what's known as the fall veto session in mid to late October. Now, the biggest crisis that's facing the state of Illinois, particularly in the Chicagoland area, is definitely not rideshare drivers. It is to do with the transit systems, particularly what's known as the regional transportation. So, but getting back to Illinois, what's happening this fall is, well, if the deficit, and we're talking like a $771 million deficit for the Chicago Transit Authority, the suburban bus lines, and the Metro train authorities, you're looking at what's known as the fiscal cliff. That is the number one priority because they left Springfield back in June. So you're looking at massive layoffs and service cuts unless the state finds funding. Some of the funding ideas weren't very appealing. One's known as the delivery tax for anybody, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Uber Eats, whether it's Doordash, no matter who it is. It's a matter of you'll be subject to a $1.50 tax. It's known as the pizza tax because it's food delivery. So there was no action on that to complete this in both chambers of the General Assembly. So there are only 6 days of this veto session this October. That is by far, because that hits January 1st of next year. So basically the rideshare drivers aren't going to see any movement. Now, a month ago, they were told they're going to file a bill. I have been tracking this. I have not seen a bill filed, or at least not filed yet. What are they going to base it on? My guess is either Massachusetts, Minnesota, maybe California, AB 1340. I think that's the bill number for the independent contractor unionization out in California. But we haven't seen a bill yet. So, but the earliest is going to even be touched is going to be January of next year. Now, why couldn't we do something to maybe make sure that this is shovel ready? Make sure that all the parties can talk, how novel, let's all discuss what we want to see in this. Let's discuss the real legal challenges. If this is tied up in the courts for 2 to 3 years, you're not helping drivers.
Yeah,
and yes, basically what I've heard from you, Steve, and several other dashers, there are other app-based platforms that need some scrutiny.
Yeah,
And
for the most part, let's be honest, they all do. And they all
yes.
need to lead, at least, even if it's just kind of getting some of the even small startup ones in line before they become big. Like I see them making some of the mistakes, and then it's like, well, those mistakes will grow into other ones. Seen this. Let's just make sure you do it right out of the gate.
Right. And that brings up the third option. I mentioned two options. One is the Massachusetts option. Yep. The other is the Washington State option. And as far as for Illinois, now there is a third option, which not a lot may agree with, but it's something that Illinois did back in 2007. And that's what I've referred to as the carve in. Because you know what carve out is, you exempt certain industries and professions from like AB5.
Yep.
Well, what I've looked at is, Illinois passed its first worker classification for the construction industry back in 2007. It was implemented in 2008. And what they did, and this came out at the subject matter hearing in Springfield, where I testified at in April. And what happened was they used, at the time, the General Assembly used a then current 2005 research from the University of Missouri that said that construction industry was having misclassification, true misclassification. So the General Assembly set up what's known as the Employee Classification Act. It was approved and implemented. And here we are 17, 18 years later. And now is Illinois at a time where maybe for a legally defined app-based business, does that kind of and Illinois does not use the strict ABC test. I'm very clear on that. We use more of an ABCD test. It's not the strict ABC test. It is an ABCD test, but it's not. But it's only confined to certain industries that you can prove there is real misclassification on. And like you said earlier, Steve, they'll just threaten to leave the state. Some might say, let them.